שלום, מאזינות ומאזינים, וברוכים הבאים לפרק ה-28 של על אמונות ותוצאותיהן, beliefs and consequences. היום, בפעם הראשונה, נקיים את הפרק הזה ונערוך אותו בשיחה באנגלית. אני מקווה שזה בסדר עם כל מאזיננו, תכף תראו למה זה היה חשוב לנו לעשות את זה באנגלית, ומכאן נמשיך, כמובן בפרקים הקרובים נחזור לעברית. So, welcome everybody to episode number 28 of Beliefs and Consequences. This is Daniel Adar speaking. And for the first time, we are going to make the podcast in English. And for a good reason, as you will know very soon. Another first is that I'm going to be talking with Yolanda Hairston. And she is my partner in life and in making the podcast. Yolanda is the producer of all episodes so far and probably all episodes coming. So this time she will be in both sides of the microphone. For English speakers who don't know me yet, my name is Daniel, or for you, Daniel. I was born in Argentina and I live in Israel for the last 42 years, more or less. And so there are many things that people here, Israelis, so in general, people living outside the US don't really know about the United States, about the experience of being an American citizen, etc. That's the reason I decided to make this episode with Yolanda and in English, because we were having experiences and information the last couple of years about many things that happen in the United States, and we have misconceptions, Israelis and others. And some of the things that happened just lately in the last year or two were, for example, the killing of George Floyd in the United States by a police officer or two, Black Lives Matter, all the protests, etc. So there are many things that we, as Israelis and others, don't really know about what really means to be living in the United States, being a minority, etc. So it's always about beliefs and consequences. This is our podcast. So when we have beliefs, we have opinions, usually made by some information, we may have misconceptions. And this is why we want to talk with Yolanda in this episode. When we have wrong information or incomplete information, we make opinions, distorted opinions, and this is what we want to correct a little bit, at least to make everybody think again about things we are sure we know. So, without further ado, hello, Yolanda.
Hello, Danielle. Hello, listeners. I'm so happy to be on the other side for this episode. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you so close to the microphone, because usually we are on the other side. Listeners don't know, but you make everything possible. The only thing I contribute is some ideas, but I wouldn't have a clue how to make a podcast. So thank you so far.
Thank you, Daniel. Shalom, מאזינות ומאזינים.
So we were talking between ourselves, of course, many times about these issues. And I can tell you, as a person from the outside who didn't grow up in the States, never study American history, etc. But the things we all know, the thing we all think we know, especially in Israel, is that, okay, there was a long period of a few hundred years of slavery, but then slavery ended. There was the abolition in 1865. And since then, we assume that everything is fair and open and egalitarian, etc. So what could be the problem? What could go wrong in such a long period since the abolition of slavery? But then I learned that other things happened. Even between the abolition in 1865 and the Voting Rights Act from 1965. So we should be in a perfect situation already. But when I watch the news and I read and I get some information of what's going on, the reality is very different from this utopia, like, okay, slavery ended hundreds of years ago, so what could be the problem? So to help me figure it out and learn a little more than I already know, that's why I'm going to ask you, Yolanda, a few questions. As I said, what we all know is that slavery ended formally in 1865, right? So what happened between 1865 and the 60s when the Voting Rights Act was passed, which means that now no problem, everybody can vote. But it's a long period from about which I don't know much. So what is important, you think, for people outside the U.S., in Israel? You're living in Israel for about 15 years. What do you think Israelis should know about all this era between the formal abolition of slavery and our times?
I think the biggest point that I could make to my fellow Israelis who don't really understand the very complex history about the United States and who echo the things that you just said. Oh, slavery was so long ago. Well, not to make a comparison, because this is not the oppression Olympics. Two things can be true at the same time. 3 and 4 things can be true at the same time. And while chattel slavery was horrific and horrible, and while the Holocaust was horrific and horrible, there are still some parallels that we can draw from that. If we look at Israeli society today in 2022, and there are children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who are growing up in the shadows of the Holocaust, who have generational traumas that affect them. We can look at our fellow citizenry on a day-to-day basis. And oftentimes I hear people excuse or try to explain or just try to rationalize some of the behavior that we have. Best example, queuing in line here in Israel. And there's a joke for many other Jews and other listeners around the world who don't really understand this contentious point about Israeli society is that we Israelis don't exactly stand in line and act politely all of the time. And one of the things that I often hear, it's this refrain of about when we had to stand in line politely to go to the gas chambers, to be killed. And that's carried on still decades later, generations pass this down, these behaviors. And so if we can look at that as a parallel to say, of course, people are still affected by the effects of the Holocaust today. Don't you think that Black people in America, and I want to make a distinction specifically African Americans in America, in the United States, are going to be affected by chattel slavery today as well, especially when, and we're going to get into some of this, so many things are institutionalized with the racism that affect people today. It's people don't realize Black people are maybe 18% of the population in the United States now. The last statistic I knew off the top of my head was 13. People don't realize that we're that small a number. And people see things on the television and they think, oh, Black people in America are doing well, it's okay, until you see some of the news about Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Sandra Bland, etc. The sad list of Black people murdered by the hands of the police who are supposed to protect and serve them is far too long. But aside from that, people have this Disneyland notion of America as a whole and don't really understand why the Black Lives Matter movement happens, why people protest, why we still even have a need for Black sororities and fraternities, other professional organizations that are designated for and quite inclusive of Black people. So it's important to make those parallels and for other Israelis specifically to begin to understand that it's not one has it so much worse than the other. I refuse to get into that. But it's important to say, hey, we're human beings and we have shared experiences. And sadly, we have this oppression, institutionalized rape and murder and being held down by a system that is supposed to support you as well. So there's that very important parallel.
So there's a couple of things that you said I would like to clarify. First, you said that the discrimination could be institutionalized, but not only, and other means. So institutionalized means like regulations, law, right? That specifically states different kind of rights or statuses, legal statuses among different parts of the population. And the other non-institutionalized stuff, it's all kinds of racism. I mean, costumes and habits, things that happen that make you feel bad, even if they are not by law, but these are people treat other people based on racism. So there are two kinds. But the second thing, you say that like the Holocaust gave us a lot of memories and experience that may impact the behavior generations after that. When we talk about the US, it's not only memories of the slavery from 150 years ago, it's also from the period that we wanted you to talk about, from 1865 until at least the 60s of the 20th century. So it's a very long period of about 100 years. Many things happened there. It's not like people are remembering the 17th century or 16th century. No, the things happened to people my age or a little bit older, or your parents or your grandparents. So it is very fresh. It's a very long history. So I would like to ask you about this period that we call the segregation and other all kind of terms. So the thing is, what should we know? You can include the personal experiences because you know about your parents and your grandparents, things that the first time I heard some of those stories already sound very strange to me, very, very unusual. And I thought if I was in this situation, me and my father will surely make us different people regarding our own country, our own state. So all this period before the Voting Rights Act, before it was completely like a plain law for everybody, everybody's right to vote. What is all this segregation things? How it worked? It was institutionalized. Was a bunch of laws. What do we mean by that?
It was everything. I want to share and explain about this time in history after slavery, after 1865. So it was a period called the Jim Crow era. And there were many laws. So speaking about on an institutional level, the Jim Crow laws. Now, first of all, Jim Crow, what is that? Jim Crow became like a phrase that people would say for Negro to designate for Black people. And Jim Crow was this caricature of singing and dancing Black people. And it was done by a white person who was in blackface. So he painted his face to make him look dark, changed his hair to like Afro hair. And he's, doing like this minstrel show, shucking and jiving, picking on, as an entertainer, making fun of Black people. And so that became Jim Crow. And anything depicting Black people, referring to Black people, became called Jim Crow. So they had these Jim Crow laws that were aimed at Black people in the States. And they were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the United States. So starting from...
Yeah, before so the laws are made by different states. So my situation in California or in Florida or in Oregon will be different?
Yes, because the Jim Crow laws were specifically in the southern United States, the hotbed of a lot of racial inequality and really horrible history. But that doesn't mean that other states in the U.S. were excluded from it. There's certainly racism happening in California. Black people weren't allowed to own homes. If you were in Hollywood as a Black person, then you were probably working as a domestic. Very few on the silver screen. If you were a Black person in Chicago during this era, life experiences were certainly quite different from what people in Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, Mississippi were experiencing, but they had their own hardships and difficulties as well. But the Jim Crow laws were specifically aimed at the southern U.S. states, yes.
The segregation is one thing or is a bunch of situations?
So the segregation can also come from legal enforcement, but it's also quite cultural. And then people also, as a species, as humans, we tend to gravitate towards likes. So you can have where people will segregate themselves. There's a saying, and I think there's actually a book about it also, about why are all the Black kids sitting together at the lunch table at school. And so a lot of that comes from, it's passed down from actual racial segregation laws. So you could have segregation that was institutionalized, saying, okay, this is a water fountain for white people only. You could have it on a social, economic, business level where like Woolworths wouldn't allow Black people to eat at the counter with other white people. You could certainly have it by groups of people just wanting to keep other people out of their neighborhoods, which could be on a social and local level of, okay, we don't like your kind around here, so we're going to make sure that you're not going to try to rent or buy this property. And also, of course, even banks still to this day have unfair business practices, really a lot of racial stuff going on with saying that they're not going to give home loans, mortgages to people of color as well. So it kind of transcends just one notion. The worst, of course, is when the nation as a whole has institutional racism embedded in the laws.
I remember when I saw for the first time a great movie, Mississippi Burning, from the 80s with Gene Hackman. I recommend everybody to watch it. I learned a lot because then I read that it was quite accurate. It's not just an invention based on real historical events. And I saw there was a scene when two FBI investigators from New York come to Mississippi, and they go into a bar or a restaurant, and the youngest guy, investigator from the FBI, sat down at the place where black people should be sitting only, and everybody looked like something terrible happened. And I didn't know when I watched it, when I saw that, I didn't know if he broke a law or it's something that you just don't do, or what was formal or informal. Of course, in any of these two cases, it would be a terrible thing. But I didn't know if he broke a law, he's going to pay a fine, or you just don't do it. And people were astonished. So different situations in different places.
Yeah, I mean, more than anything, the biggest fear is not only what the law says, but it's what the law of the people say, basically, and the court of public opinion. And if you are in a place where you shouldn't be, like there are still some sundown towns in the US. Sundown town is a place where if you are non-white, probably also non-cisgendered, non-heterosexual, you don't let the sun go down on your back while still being in that town. You get out. It's not the place for you. It's okay for you to drive through, to spend your money there, maybe say hi to some friends, but when the sun goes down, that's not the place you need to be, and they will let you know. So like in that example of Mississippi Burning, the movie, the patrons who went in knew the rules of that society. Kind of to piggyback off of that, my favorite food growing up, like for most kids, was pizza. It's tacos today, as Daniel well knows, but I loved pizza. And I remember being a very young child asking my mom which pizza place was her favorite, because mine used to be Pizza Hut or Godfather's Pizza. And I asked her, how much did you love Pizza Hut? And she told me they didn't have Pizza Hut then. My mother grew up in Virginia. And I said, okay, so what was your favorite pizza place? And she said she didn't have one. And I was astonished. What? You didn't have a favorite pizza restaurant? And my mom explained to me, and it gives me chills still to think about it to this day, that she didn't go to a pizza restaurant until she was in her 20s, married to my dad, maybe a few years before I was born. She and my dad went to a jazz festival at Underground Atlanta, and that was the first time she had ever had pizza. And it's like, why? They make pizza in Virginia. It's not Mars. I didn't understand. And she explained to me they couldn't go to an establishment that sold pizza. Black people weren't allowed to go in there. And I thought, okay, as a child, my parents made sure that I was educated and well aware of history and how things worked and our place in society and how other people placed us in society. And so I thought, you didn't grow up during slavery. What do you mean you couldn't go to get pizza?
You were talking about the 60s?
This was in the 70s.
Already
This
70s?
was, I think it was maybe 1973 at the latest, between 71, 73, when my mom went and had her first pizza in Atlanta, Georgia, because before then she wasn't allowed to go in any other places. And to think that my mom couldn't go into establishments, and certainly my dad, who missed the civil rights movement in the States because he was living outside of the country, to think that my mom didn't grow up with the joy of being able to go to a pizza place as a kid, unfathomable.
This is a kind of information that I exactly was looking for, because I think it's very important. In 72, for example, I was 11 years old in Argentina. I think if me and my parents couldn't have a pizza because we were a Jewish family, I think I will remember it forever and my kids will know about it. And if it happened for many generations, obviously so. So this is exactly the kind of facts that you don't have in every history review or an article. Of course, if you read history books, you'll probably find it, but most of us don't read history books about the rest of humankind. So we don't know these things. And when we see just one incident between a white police officer and a black kid, or whatever incident with racial implications, we don't know all this background. some people are already fed up for many generations because these little things, which are not so little. I can't imagine if my kids, when they were younger, they wanted to go for a pizza and they couldn't because of their ethnicity. It would be a terrible place to live in. And this is the United States in the 20th century, when I was already a literate person. I mean, it's not the Middle Ages. So that's amazing for many people to hear it. I remember the first time you told me, I was quite surprised.
Yeah, well, think just when you were, 4 years old, Black people fully got the right to vote in the United States. We're not talking 1865, 18 anything. We're talking the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that in 64 there was the 24th Amendment. A lot of people, I'm sure, in Israel aren't aware that there were laws that kept Black people and other people of color. It's very important to mention also Native Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans. Everyone's kind of lumped with, you're not white, you're together. Black people getting the worst of it to a certain degree. Again, not the oppression Olympics, but I'm talking about the laws that were on the books, what was institutionalized.
So you mean there were laws regarding before 1965, but in the 20th century there were laws that will limit the possibility of a Black person to vote?
Yeah, absolutely. So a polling place is a place where you go to vote. So there was a poll tax, actually. In 1902, the Virginia State Constitution authorized the poll tax for all Black and people of color to pay as a prerequisite to vote.
This is in Virginia?
In Virginia, where my mother grew up.
And the law was specifically for Black people?
Black and other people of color.
Non-white, whatever that
Yes,
means. In the US, it's not a matter of dermatology. It's not about the color of the skin. I know many Jews in Israel here that consider themselves white, but in the US, they would consider non-white, brown. I don't know what expression we have there. But this law wasn't for, let's say, an Anglo-Saxon white.
No. It was specifically to oppress and to suppress the vote of minorities. That if you were Black, and perfect example of this, my mother's younger sister to this day remembers being a little girl, going with my grandmother to go vote. This was in the late 50s, early 60s, and my grandmother would have to pay a poll tax. She's a citizen of the United States, but because of her skin color, because of her ethnic background, forget how much white is in my family on either side, and we can also talk about that a bit later. But my grandmother, as a Black woman, citizen, had to go and pay to exercise her right to vote.
So no pay, no vote.
Right.
If you don't have the money.
Right. And many other people also had to endure literacy tests, which were these asinine, ridiculous tests. You have to prove that you can read and write. You would think for a literacy test, it's not only that. And forget about inequality with education. No, it's going much further, asking the most ridiculous questions about the U.S. Constitution that some legal scholar would really have to know to be able to answer in order to prove that they are literate so that they can vote. And then you also pay your tax. I mean, it even got so crazy as to asking people to guess how many marbles are in this jar. Come on, it's not a state fair. This is talking about people's voting rights. They pay their taxes. They want to be able to have their voice heard for their representation as well.
I learned about this literacy test as a precondition before you vote. I learned about it from Yuval Noah Harari, which is a great professor of history. Probably everybody knows him because of his books, Sapiens and others. And he told a case like a Black young person going to the poll and was a clerk or whoever doing this test and could ask him every difficult question about the Constitution that maybe a professor of political science would know or maybe not. And of course, then denying the rights of the person to vote because he couldn't answer exactly as he should. And then a white, rural, farmer guy, all could come and hear some basic questions that you could even read it and answer and immediately vote. So you have the money stuff, poll tax, the literacy excuse, and all these things making harder for people to vote. until 1965?
Until 1965, technically, but we still have it now. In my great state of North Carolina, I found out that it was just in 2013 where the restrictions that were placed on southern states to make sure that they didn't violate the laws that were enacted from the 24th Amendment to basically ensure the right for all citizens to be able to vote with the Voting Rights Act. Those restrictions that were put on the southern states weren't lifted until 2013.
So less than 10 years ago.
Yeah. And so then there are many other sneaky, tricky things that can be done to keep people from having their voices heard, enacting their rights as citizens. Voter suppression is still a very big problem.
I'm going to ask you about voter suppression soon, but before that, I guess many people, young people, found it very hard to live in the States. Some people left, or how did they cope with this limitation?
How did people cope? That's
in your family.
Yeah, in my family, I think I can highlight it by giving the best example that my father left. He dreamed of seeing other countries. He loves being immersed in other cultures, and he didn't want to be stuck in that horrible cycle that he was going to be in. So he joined the army when he was 18 and he left. My dad lived in Germany for quite some time. And can you imagine that this is post-World War II Germany, that my dad said, hey, as a black man, I'm going to go still into the segregated United States Army and go overseas to Germany. My dad fought in Vietnam, to make that choice, to leave everything that's familiar, family, friends, for on one hand, an opportunity at a better life, and on the other hand, to completely give yourself a chance, a fighting chance to live, to not be killed growing up as a young adult. And my dad was married at the time, his first wife, had young children, to miss all of that because he wanted to be able to still say, I'm a man. I want to be able to go into a restaurant and not be relegated to sitting back near the kitchen or near the public restrooms if I get seated at all. And some people will say, well, why does all of that matter? Because we're human beings. We want to be afforded the same respect and opportunities as everybody else. And for my dad to have to choose to go to post-war Germany to try to get that says a whole lot, I think.
Well, I think I would be much more sensitive to that horrible situation. I remember when I lived in Argentina, I was in a high school, and I had conversations with friends in Argentinian school, and I told them I'm going to live to Israel. And some of them told me, but this is your country, you have all the rights, you're equal, so you have double loyalty or double identity. And I told them, first of all, I'm not equal. By the constitution, Argentine constitution at that time, I couldn't be president of the state. I couldn't be chief of staff, justice, Supreme Court justice, etc. So a friend asked me, oh, so you want to be president now? And I said, I don't want to be nothing yet. All I want is to have the same rights as you do. So imagine if I was so sensitive for these clauses, that not being able to be a couple of things, it bothered me a lot. I don't know what I feel if I have to be in that situation, that even to have a coffee could be a problem, or having a pizza or whatever. So that's an amazing situation. I want the listeners to put themselves. That's why I'm doing myself. If I put myself in this kind of situation, that every step, everything you buy, every time you go to school, the army or whatever, you feel that the people are making an effort to make you feel different and less important, that's a terrible situation. So your father left, you have to be in Europe, you have to be overseas or in Vietnam because his home place wasn't very friendly to him.
To say the least, yes. And it doesn't stop just with my father. I can tell you so many stories of, to be fair, I've had a good life, a great upbringing with both of my parents who worked hard, professional careers. I grew up in a nice home in the best, predominantly Black neighborhood, middle class. We looked after each other. I had a great life growing up. But I've still experienced my fair share of racism. I've been called the N-word more times than I can count. And I've also had other people ask me where my horns are when they find out I'm Jewish. But I grew up with many different things that kind of capitalize a capital R for racism that I experienced, whether it was directed at myself or I was immersed in it. One story is that I was in elementary school and there were two kids who had the same last name. One was a young black boy and one was a young white girl. And being young kids, we were just silly, saying like, oh, they're married, they're going to get married, they have the same last name, ooh. And no, we had to stop, and the teacher explained to us, as best she could for our very young minds, no, they have the same last name because her family probably owned his family. That's a really bitter pill to swallow, and very difficult for the two of them who were really good friends and remained good friends. But I remember explaining that to another Israeli I worked with. He was talking something about some celebrity and the last name. And I said, you know, they have that last name more than likely because a white family owned them and that was that family's last name. Certainly, of course, you have free black people in the history of the United States, people who decided to take another last name that they liked because our whole history was robbed of us. We don't know what our original last names or original names. So many of us don't know where we came from. I watch all these great genealogy shows and like, who do you think you are and finding your roots. And for most of the African-American guests, they can only trace their history back to 1865 because that was the first time black people were counted on the census rolls. And for other people, they can go back further and further and further. My own family history, I'm a Hairston, and I come from one of the largest families in America, great rich history, where one of the premier multicultural families in America, black and white. There's a book written about us, the Hairstons, an American family in black and white, that tells just a sliver of some of the family stories. But I know that I went with my parents to Scotland a few years ago for my dad's 80th birthday, and we traced our Scottish roots there. And I was able to get some documentation going back to 1655, I think. And that's amazing. But I know I can only trace my family back because it's connected to other white people. What happened to my ancestors before that, I don't know. And I'll never know. Mm-hmm. And that's really unfair that I know that I'm able to count on these other people who, yes, many of the white ancestors that I have, many of them did love. That's a part of the Hairston story as well. Did love, did legitimize the children, did recognize as much as they could on their plantations or in their states, their counties as best they could. But there's a whole lot of rape that's in that as well.
So there are all these family names, European, let's say people called Jackson or Williams, etc. So they they got this name from slave owners, from plantations or whatever they were living in,
right.
And they remain with those names.
Yeah. So during chattel slavery, this makes me think of, it's so relevant right now, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's just being vilified by Tucker Carlson and the Fox News Trumpist people and many, many more, that she's an African-American woman who is a judge and she is a nominee to join the Supreme Court of the United States. And here in 2022, we're finally able to celebrate, wow, a Black woman on the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. And I'm just going to say it, they're giving her hell. Beyond that, beyond her unfair treatment because she is a Black woman, and let's not sugarcoat anything, that's exactly why she's being mistreated. Her last names, Brown and Jackson. Those are, ding, 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 hello, those are slave owners' names. Those are plantation names that we would say that's your governor's name.
So the history is intermingled, mixed. You may have a name that now is a neutral stuff, names don't kill anyone, but the history is not so simple. So when I think about our times since 65, after the Voting Rights Act passed and in theory everything should be okay, we still have things like vote suppression, which is amazing. I want to talk to you in a minute about it. But before that, I want to talk about something else, because we have, as you say, institutionalized discrimination or racism and personal experiences. The vote suppression is like something on the political level, it is very important. But before that, personal experiences, I heard once, and also you told me about what kind of speech parents have with kids when they start driving, when they get driving lessons, what to be careful about. I can tell you that when my sons start driving, the things I said them, of course, probably like every parent, is how to be careful. And I told them that think of driving as a game. You win if you go back home, or if you reach the place you were driving to without a scratch, not you and not the car, if you don't mind. So that's the only thing. If you get home in one piece, nothing hurts, you didn't hit anyone, nobody hit you, and the car is okay, you won the game. So that's the only thing. And then I heard what you told me about parents, especially black families. Parents tell their kids what to be care about if you are in a car and if you are driving.
Yes, and to win that game, it's not just to come home without a scratch on your person or the vehicle. It's to come home alive. The speech that we were given when we were 15 years old, taking driver's ed in high school, all my parents, all of my friends' parents, all of my Black friends' parents, a few Native American and Mexican American parents, the speeches that we all received were keep your hands on 10 and 2 on the wheel, speak respectfully, don't look the officer in the eye.
So you mean speak respectfully when a police officer stops you for whatever reason?
For whatever reason, which will probably be a bullshit reason. Oh, you have a tail light that's out. Oh, you were driving too slowly. Oh, you didn't come to a complete stop. All of the things that it's like, yeah, you saw a Black person driving a car. And if you see a young Black teenager driving a nice car, oh, you're going to get pulled over. Because they'll say, we just wanted to make sure you fit the description of someone who may have stolen a car, blah, blah, blah. You can understand where that's going. But yes, you have to speak respectfully. It's like being on a plantation again. Yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, boss, no, boss. That I'm okay. You have to say when they ask for your license and the car registration, okay, I'm going to slowly move my hands over to the glove box to get that for you. Because if you move too fast, you'll get shot. If you dare have an attitude as a citizen who knows their rights, like Sandra Bland, who what I think the charge was, or why she was even pulled over, was that she didn't come to a complete stop at a stop sign. So she had to get pulled over and essentially detained by the officer. And then she wound up dead in a jail cell for nothing. And these are the things that we want to avoid. We don't want to be like the Black man who was shot and killed by a police officer in the passenger seat of his car on Facebook Live in front of his girlfriend and his infant daughter in the back seat. Because when he was asked by the officer if he had a weapon in the car, and he explained, yes, I have a license to carry a weapon legally. It's in the trunk of my car. So then the officer freaked out and shot him. Now, they're good police officers, of course. I still want to believe in officer friendly. I'm not going to paint all officers of the law with this horrible paintbrush. But I grew up with, and I know as a person of color, as a Black woman, when I'm in the United States, I have to be the best driver on the road. I don't want to give any excuse to be pulled over for anything, especially after dark, especially in the wrong county, because I may not make it out alive. Even if I keep my bifurcated tongue in my mouth, even if I don't get sassy and slick, even if I don't say what I really want to say or behave the way I may want to because I'm frustrated with how I'm being treated, I have to mind my P's and Q's. I have to be the epitome of the perfect citizen and pray that I don't get killed. Forget people worry about, oh, I hope I don't get a speeding ticket. A ticket I wish. I want to make it out alive.
So that's quite a different experience from all of us.
When my parents were here in Israel, this was years ago, but we were driving up in the hills of Jerusalem and there was a police officer. And here in Israel, the officers drive with their lights on always. Not so in the States. You get the lights on when they're in pursuit, and you get a siren on when it's hot pursuit, and you get the whoop whoop if you're Black driving. So you don't even get the respect of the full siren, just the whoop whoop. You hear that sound, you know there's trouble coming. But so my dad saw in the rearview mirror that there was a police officer driving behind us and like speeding. And I wasn't scared because I've been driving here for some years. I knew the deal. But my dad kind of just got really tense and he's pointing to me and he's like, look. And I was like, no, it's okay. He's not pulling me over. But he still, with that American sensibility, was terrified of us getting pulled over and what would happen. I can't express to you what a relief it is to be able to let a little bit of my guard down while driving here in Israel or in France or in anywhere else but the US. I'm still carrying that American part of me. I'm carrying my history and experience with me. So I'm still always afraid, but I'm not afraid that I'm going to get hurt.
I remember many years ago when I watched, of course, movies, Hollywood movies. I saw many times that police officers telling a black driver, black young guy, put your hands when I can see them, or all kind of stuff, and light in the eyes. And I thought, okay, it's a movie. Who was this kind of experience with the policemen, like they were criminals? So it's probably a little bit exaggerated. I saw it in all movies. And only a few years ago, I don't remember exactly how and when, I realized that no, this is a real situation. So you have to be afraid of the police?
Yeah, it's beyond just real. It's happening every day. And lately my YouTube has been suggesting me other videos because of something that I recently watched, but of judges, attorneys who are black getting pulled over by the police. And even when they show any documentation as to who they are, even there was a lawyer, I can't remember in which state, he was a black man. He was taking out the trash to the trash bin outside of his office. And the police came over to him and wanted to search him and his vehicle and to question him and to basically detain him because he was taking out the trash in the trash bin. Why should that be a problem? And they hemmed and hawed the officers. Oh, well, you may not have a right to be here and you're taking your trash to this receptacle, or a whole bunch of mishigas, a whole bunch of malarkey, ridiculous stuff. But that's the reality that we live with, these aggressions and lots of microaggressions all of the time. And being behind the wheel of a car, I think, is one of the most dangerous places for a black or other person of color in the US today.
I think there was a piece of stand-up. I don't know if Dave Chappelle, who was it?
Oh, I think it was Chris Rock, about how not to get your ass whipped by
Chris
the
Rock?
police. Yes.
What's the name? So,
Chris Rock. And I think the skit from the Chris Rock show was called How Not to Get Your Ass Whipped by the Police.
or something similar. Look it up, and I think it was very good. It's funny, but it's like John Oliver. I like so much. Why? Because I learned through John Oliver's show about the worst things that happen in the United States, but with humor. So you can enjoy it all the way to to realizing what terrible things happen. But this is a good way to teach things with jokes all the time, to see how ridiculous it is. It's bad, but it's also ridiculous. So I think humor is the best companion of bad news.
Mm-hmm.
So this is who was it?
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock. Okay, so this is on a personal experience level about things that form the reality since '65. But there are other things on institutional level that we said before. There is a concept of vote suppression. Vote suppression means legal means to make citizens either not to vote, make it harder for them to vote. The concept in himself itself, it's so amazing. It's ridiculous. It's like if I was John Oliver, I would say, how is this still a thing? How vote suppression exists? I mean, I'm going to talk about my personal experience. I left Argentina in 1980. I was almost 19. Argentina didn't have democracy at that time. It was a military dictatorship for years. Terrible one, of course, very violent. And I came here, never having before experience of democracy in my life. I couldn't vote anywhere. The first time I voted for in elections was in Israel. So when I came here, I realized that the only thing you have to do if you're a citizen here, either you were born in Israel or came like me, immigrant, the only thing you have to do in order to be able to vote is be alive. If you died, you can't vote. But in any other case, you can be an inmate, you can be in prison, you can have moved to a different address yesterday. You burn all your house and all your documents. Whatever happened, You can vote. You don't have to do nothing. You are 18 and older. Next week there are elections. You go and vote. No questions asked, nothing. As long as it is really you and you are a citizen, you vote. And every regulation or laws the country made were designed to make it easier. No, you don't work that day. Transportation could be free if you live far away from your own place to vote, etc. Everything is so easy. You have a whole day to do nothing, and voting is usually very fast. Many schools are voting poll place, etc. So when I heard that in the US, even these days, Republicans' initiatives all around the nation in different states for vote suppression to make it harder to some people to vote because they usually vote against us, etc. So how is, like John Oliver, how is this still a thing? Vote suppression?
Oh, yes. Forget even trying to suppress votes with the Electoral College, which is a whole other hot mess with a very ugly history in and of itself. We'll probably have to do another episode to explain about the Electoral College.
Yeah, Electoral College is a different thing. As you know, where my Israeli audience is not like here, that everybody votes. Tonight, they count the votes. Tomorrow morning, more or less, in a couple of days, we know. Now, whoever's get more votes for president in the US means nothing. For example, when Trump won the election in 2016, he got less votes than Hillary Clinton. And also George W. Bush, he got less votes than Al Gore, etc. But it means nothing. The Electoral College is a different thing, which is a complete distortion of democracy. But never mind. Even without system, inside this system, there are different kind of methods to restrict vote. Like
Yes.
what?
Yes. So imagine my surprise being an Israeli citizen, my first time voting. And it was just, okay, I received a little petek, a little note piece of paper in the mail saying, this is where you go to vote. Okay, great. I showed up. I don't even think I had to show my Teudat Zehut, it's my Israeli ID. I just went, I said my name, they checked it off, told me here, go here, and bing, bang, boom, vote. No, when I turned 18 in the States, I had to register to vote. I had to take my birth certificate. I had a driving license.
First of all, you have to register, means you have to do something.
Yes. You have to fill out some paperwork. You have to list your address because that is going to determine which district you were in, which polling place you will go to. When I was a kid, I remember it used to be really good, at least from my childish purview, that I would go with my dad after he would get off of work, and we would go to my high school that I graduated from. We'd go down the street to the school and go vote. But now so many things are changing. So many things are regressing. It's not so easy. It was never so easy. Yeah, regressing. So one of the big issues with voting now is that many people, namely Republicans, want it to be a law that you have to provide some ID to vote, because there's this false notion that liberals, Democrats are going and they're voting more than once. And so they're skewing the votes for them. And they'll say, that's how Hillary got more votes than Trump. She voted so people voted so many times. Dead people are voting. A bunch of malarkey. It's not true. Beyond that, to be able to go vote, they want to say you have to provide your ID to show that it's you, to prove, so we can only make sure that registered voters are voting and they're only voting once. No, so okay, what's the problem with that? One, unlike here in Israel, you have to, like you said, you have to do something. You have to register to vote. So you have to get a form. So you have to either take some time out of your day to go to your board of elections or wherever to get this form, or you can download it. What if you don't have a computer, internet? People still forget that in 2022, there are many people in the United States, not just minorities. There are many white people living in rural U.S. and the flyover states and beyond. Older people, people with disabilities. There are many people who don't have access to good, reliable, fast internet, and forget being able to afford it as well is another problem. So let's say you can get the paper form in person, that's fine. Then you have to provide something proving who you are. Usually it's a driving license. Many people can register to vote even online with their driving license or with an official ID that's given by the Department of Motor Vehicles. But then you have to have a driving license. To get a driving license, you have to be able to pass tests. You have to have the access, the resources that the time and money to be able to do so. And when I grew up in the States, if you went to public school at 14 and a half, you start driving ed course. You can get a driving permit at age 15, 15 and a half, and get a driving license at 16. But you still have to be able to pay for that driving license and to get it renewed on time. So that's another cost. Think about people who live in populous cities like New York City, who don't need to have a car. They have access to transportation, so they don't have a driving license. So then what can they use that has a photo ID? A passport? Not everybody in the United States has a passport, and it's not cheap to get. So that's a barrier for a lot of people to be able to vote. Why is that instituted? Why is that put upon the voter to have to prove who they are to be able to vote? If that's the case, then have a national ID like we have here in Israel. Sure, you have a social security number that you're issued when you're born, but it's a piece of paper with a number. A photograph is not attached to it. In the United States, we guard our social security numbers close to the chest, put them in lock boxes, safe deposit boxes. It's not like a Teudat Zuhut number that you give out when you're calling Bezek for internet service, or that you're giving out online when you order something. No, we keep it safe and secure. So if you're going to say people have to have an ID to vote, then give a national ID to everybody. Don't do this. It's obvious it's making sure that some people don't have access to be able to do so to keep them from being able to vote.
I think what you were explaining is that even if you can do all these things, it's not enough, it's not good enough. It's bad because any inconvenience, big or small, can make the difference about if I'm going to vote or not. I mean, some people plan to vote, but then it's too far. I have to do all these kind of things. I have to go somewhere.
Or wait in line.
Or wait in line for hours, and usually presidential election in winter, maybe you move to a different state or whatever reason. For example, in Israel, the election day is a holiday. So imagine it's not a holiday. You have to travel, you have to wait in line, apart from all other stuff you had to do before. And maybe you lose some money also because it's not a holiday, and you should be working, right? It's not a holiday everywhere.
No.
I know people here that don't know if where to vote or not because the holidays will go somewhere, and then they say, okay, 5 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes in the evening when I come back from whatever place I went to. So it's very important, even that, what happens in the day of election, how comfortable it is to go and vote.
Sure, yeah. If you have to work and then you have to pick up children from school, take care of someone, do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. If you've moved and you have to drive back to the other county or state or whatever, still even within your own city, it's not made to be an easy process to be able to vote. We have many other national holidays that I have my own personal opinions about as to whether they still need to be holidays, when we could give a day to say this is a federal holiday for most people to have the day off like any other bank holiday, to be able to go to exercise the right to vote.
And it's also a holiday that you celebrate something. Democracy is something to celebrate if it's well done and to keep. It's like health. You have to do something to stay healthy, and you have to celebrate your health. Not just say, okay, vote if you want, don't vote if you don't want. And the thing is, many countries have regulations over time to make voting more accessible, even for handicapped people, for whatever reason. Everything more accessible. If you're sick, you can say, I'm sick, fill a form. That's why I didn't go to my city to vote. I vote here. It would be perfectly fine also. So you can see that the country with its many flaws is trying to do the best so no one citizen can complain saying, I wanted to vote and I couldn't. No. And some people drive you, whatever, you'll find a way. But in the United States, it's not only that the country is neutral, not helping, in many ways, it's trying to prevent. It's mostly Republicans are doing it. For example, when they lost in Georgia, and it was very important to them in the last election. So the conclusion was, too many black people and minorities voted. We have to do something about it. Otherwise, we're going to lose again. It's amazing. It's like a game. If I lost, let's change the rules until I win.
Oh, absolutely. And, the other way that people try to play this game to make sure that Black and other people of color aren't able to vote because, when they all get together and they vote, the vote may not go our way, regardless of the fact that the will of the people has been said. Forget all of that. What do? redistricting, redrawing the lines for voting districts. Oh, so if you have an area where there are too many Black people, too many Hispanics, too many of other, so then they're just going to redraw the lines to make sure that now another area absorbs some of that population, and so that they no longer have a majority in a certain area, because then that's going to prevent some local judge from sitting on the bench, and that's going to prevent some other representative from being elected, and so on and so on. So there are all of these games at play, like this horrible board game, to make sure that, okay, we have to keep some people down.
So we can see from all this, and this is only tip of the iceberg, that ethnicity is still a major thing, a major political thing in the US. It's not like, okay, this is a democracy, nobody cares, you can put your vote and it doesn't have a color like money. But no. It has many colors, and it's very important, your ethnicity. So let's go back to personal experiences, because you said you have in your own time different personal experiences. For example, before you came to Israel, you, as a Black Jewish woman, you were teaching in a Hebrew school, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you found there some diversity.
Actually, you would think not a whole lot of Jews in North Carolina, but a very good number. And I used to teach at my local synagogue. I taught the elementary school students, who I'm still very proud of. Used to teach them Hebrew, the rubrics of prayer, get them ready for bar, bat mitzvah, etc. And I grew up in that community with a president of the congregation who was a Black man. The head of the religious school had blonde hair and blue eyes and was often told that she didn't look Jewish enough. I can't remember, this is decades ago now, but that I'm referencing, but I can't remember if she was the head of maybe the Parent Teachers Association or maybe the Sisterhood, but there was a Chinese American woman who had a leadership position at our synagogue. So I saw this diversity. And while it may not have been at a great extent like you might find in other places, that you might find like even in New York amongst Jews, but I grew up with other Black Jews. I grew up with other Jews from different places in Eastern Europe, from Yemen, from Morocco, from kind of everywhere in North Carolina. And then to come to Israel, as much as I love Israel and I appreciate so many things being better here for me personally as an individual, as a Black American Israeli Jew, things that I don't have to worry about encountering here. And as much as we talk about our diversity here, it's still not the same. I encountered a lot more Jewish diversity in North Carolina than here. I do have to say, one thing that makes me very proud and still gives me goosebumps, it's a story that I've told to quite a few Americans, and they're still surprised by this, so I'm going to share it with the listeners now. The number of times that I've been followed in a department store in the United States, I can't even begin to count. Forget even whether it's Tiffany's on Rodeo Drive or an Office Depot with the one asking me where my horns are, or being at Claire's boutique at the mall, being followed while I'm watching the white girl shoplifting in front of my own eyes, stealing from the store.
Stealing, yes.
Yes, stealing. I'm seeing this, but the employees of the stores aren't seeing this or paying enough attention to it or addressing it because they're too busy watching me. Okay? So I grew up with that, always having to be careful of my behavior, how large my bag or my coat is in a store, because someone will think that I'm stealing. Okay. Jump forward to being in Jerusalem. I was going to a makolet, some other grocery store. And the security guard was an older Russian speaker. Now, I love older people and I love talking with them, and I always want to make sure to give respect. So I saw this older security guard and I saw a lot of people passing by him. They weren't opening their bags before they went in the store like is customary here. They were just ignoring him. It hurt my feelings a little bit. So as I got closer, said, okay, I'm going to smile at him and, say Boker Tov and something nice to him, acknowledge his presence, But as I approached him, someone called his name and he got called up in some other conversation. So I went on in the store and I said, when I come out, I'm going to be sure to show him my receipt. For Americans, it's like when you go shop at Sam's Club. When you come out, you have to show your receipt and your purchases to show them that you didn't steal anything or get something you weren't charged for. So I said, when I leave, okay, I'm going to smile at him and say something and show him my bag. And so I got closer to him and stuck out my receipt, stuck out my hand, and was opening my bag with a few things that I got at the store. And with complete sincerity, he said to me in a heavily accented English, "No, you go on ahead. It's okay. I know Black people don't steal." I could cry retelling that story right now. Because it was like, wait, what? Say that again? That he really meant it. He was passing me through, like, you don't have to show me your bag and your receipt. Whatever. I know Black people don't steal. But in the country that I lived in for 32 years, that my father fought wars for, that my mother served as a captain in the Army Nurse Corps, that I served in the Army Reserves, where I grew up, my birthright, citizen of the United States, I would be followed in stores, no matter what I had on. Not that it should matter how I was dressed, what I looked like. None of that should matter if I'm a patron of an establishment. But it was just like, it began to be just a common occurrence. I knew, okay, somebody's going to be watching me like a hawk when I go in the store. To come to here, to Israel, and where people are still like, you're Jewish, you're not, whatever, which also shouldn't matter. But to have this man who was a Russian speaker, so probably from Russia or Ukraine, and for his worldview to be, I know Black people don't steal. What a beautiful, amazing thing. Like, I wish he would go and tell other people that. Take some stress off of our backs because we're sick of it. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing difference. I'm happy you had this experience.
Well.
In this one. You deserve it. Okay, so now, since we're talking more than an hour,
Yeah.
I want to jump to a good thing that happened, which was the election of Barack Obama for presidency. So I remember when I started learning about Barack Obama, the first thing I thought was, he's like me. And I tell you why. I learned that his mother is a white person born in the American continent, like my mother, like me. His father was born in Africa, like my father. My father was born in Morocco, and we're about the same age, I think. So I think, well, that's nice. But the thing I had to think about is, why is such an important event? So I understand it's a black person born in the United States becoming president. I think it's very amazing, a great thing to happen. The only thing that made me sad is that we still have to celebrate this in the 21st century. It should have happened like 200 years ago. It should be obvious, should be understood that the president is a person born in this state. It could be a man, woman, black, Asian, whatever religion. So it was amazing. Even the terminology, I mean, Obama is called African American. I should be African American for the same reason. I was born in America. Dear listeners, if you don't know, America is a continent. It's not a country. It's not one state or a nation. America begins in Alaska or Canada in the north and ends in Tierra del Fuego in the south with Chile and Argentina. There are many, many countries. English is spoken by a minority. Most people speak Spanish, some Portuguese, and some English. So this is America. So I'm an African American. If African is by the father and American when I was born. I was born in America. My father was from Africa, but it would never be an issue, or not even in Israel. But in the state, yes, it's such an issue that, of course, we are happy it happened. But I think it should happen before, right?
Yeah,
a little bit before. We are still celebrating the 21st century. I mean, I'm celebrating also, but it's a shame for the majority, not for the minority.
Yeah.
The minority, of course, is happy. But it should have happened like before 1965. It should have happened the moment you say, okay, now we have a democracy, everybody can vote, no more slavery. That's it.
Yeah, what took so long? But I can tell you, when I was a little kid in Miss Wynn's first grade class, and we were getting a very early civics lesson, probably around election time, and she was saying to us impressionable young children with our smiling face that any one of you can become president one day, once you're 35 and you meet some criteria. And I remember thinking, this black lady should know better than to tell us this, because I know good and dang on well. That's my North Carolina coming out. I know good and dang on well I can never be president one day. I thought having a black president of the United States of America would never happen in my lifetime, ever. So I was over overjoyed. I remember being at home with my little dog here in Israel when Obama won the election. And back then, Israelis were loving it. They were so happy. I remember there were fireworks. People went to the Refet near where I lived, and they painted the cows red, white, and blue. People were very, very happy. Sadly, that changed, but I remember the excitement. And I called my parents. I was crying. And then to jump to today, the vice president is a Black and Indian American woman. I can't believe it. And fingers crossed, we will get this also amazingly talented and completely capable, overqualified is usually the case, because if you're Black in America, you have to be at least twice as good to be considered half as worthy. Okay, but hopefully Judge Brown Jackson will be nominated to the Supreme Court. But I thought these things will never, ever happen in my lifetime.
Well, strange things happen. I remember after the new Pope, the present Pope was appointed. He came from Argentina. His name was Bergoglio. He was a friend of my father. He was a rabbi. But I remember a joke somebody told. It's a story. I think it's a joke, but they say that Fidel Castro was talking to Che Guevara in Cuba in the 50s or 60s, 50s. And then one asked the other, do you think one day the United States will lift the embargo on us, on Cuba? And Che Guevara said, well, you know when it will happen? When there is a Black president in the United States and a South American Pope in the Vatican. So both things happen already. I don't know the situation in Cuba, how it is now, but it just means that, things that look impossible now may happen in the future. So
we wanted to say also we were talking about President Obama and about the different terms, Black, African American, all of those things. And like you said, he's like you with a white mother, African father. How is this? Why? It seems to many people outside of the United States that Black people are fixated on race. And why we're even having this conversation and want to share experiences and information with dear listeners is so that you understand the history and that still matters today, not only for us because we're proud people and we've been through a lot and we still persevere, tried to bury us, but you didn't know we were seeds. It still matters. But why is Obama considered Black even? And so a lot of people, especially in Israel, don't know about the one drop rule. So we have to even take it back a bit. So a lot of people aren't aware about the 3/5 compromise. Now, its origin has been confused and muddled. It was stating, and this is in 1787, by the way, that out of every 5 enslaved Americans, 3 of them would count towards a person, towards a vote. And it got misconstrued into saying that every enslaved American would be counted as 3/5 of a person for taxation and representation purposes. And that's important because that's how people saw it. And that's how people acted and treated enslaved peoples. So again, this is going back to 1787. Black people were seen as 3/5 of a person. And that was okay for a lot of people, especially a lot of people who used religion to prop up why they were doing what they were doing and to say that it was okay. It's okay to enslave people. It's written in the Bible about having slaves, and they're not even fully human anyway, was how people thought and acted. Can you imagine being a human being and told you're only 3/5 of a person? You don't count. You certainly don't count when it comes being represented as a citizen here. It doesn't matter that you were born here. You don't count. Now, talking about counting people, it was important to count the number of enslaved people that you had, though, because that meant more prosperity, less work that the white people had to do off of the backs of the enslaved. So that's when the one drop rule became a thing. The one drop rule is basically, in the easiest of terms, is that if you have one drop of Black blood, you're Black. Doesn't matter if it was your great-great-great-great-granny, you're still Black. And why does that matter? Why was that important then? Because, hey, you don't have to pay for these other slaves. You can just manufacture them yourselves. You can get your jollies off and rape one of your slaves who worked for you in the house, one of your domestic chattel, essentially. And if she gets pregnant and has your baby, you don't consider that as your child because it's 3/5 of a person. And, the bit of its humanity it gets from me anyway. But okay, so it's probably got light skin and it'll work in the house. And there are many people in my own Hairston family who would have their children products of rape, sometimes of legitimate relationships. Got to put that out there. But most times from non consensual relationships with their offspring waiting on them hand and foot, enslaved. Or if they came out too dark, if they didn't pass the paper bag test of is your skin lighter or darker than a brown paper bag, then if it was too dark, then you had to go out and work in the fields. Backbreaking work in the hot sun, no reprieve, treated like a beast of burden. So the one drop rule mattered, and it still matters today, and it still impacts the Black community and mixed communities as to how much Black blood you have. So on one hand, we have to carry still as a sense of pride, and because Black people in America have always been forgiving, kind, inclusionary. If you look mostly white, but you've got a Black grandmother and you want to hang with us, you're going to get some ribbing in the beginning, but we're going to still welcome you. You're still Black. And if you, Halle Berry or Mariah Carey or Zendaya or whomever who's mixed race, white or Black, and we're going to consider you Black, you're one of us. We welcome you home. And for many other people, they're looking at them, Obama, Zendaya, Halle Berry, Zoe Kravitz, whomever. I'm just trying to rattle off some names of people in popular culture now that listeners may relate to. But they're considered Black because, okay, yeah, we needed other people to work for us.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the one drop rule, like one grandparents, etc. Reminds me, the Second World War in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
According to the laws, you were considered Jew if you had a little bit of Jewishness in the last few generations. And also the expression 3/5 of a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned religion and slavery because it was based on, the justification is very easy to justify things from the same Bible like the Jews use. It's said on the Talmud, and we mentioned it in one of the episodes of our podcast in Hebrew, that the descendants of Ham are the Africans, and it was decided that they will be slaves forever. So the Christians used it. The trade slave was made by Christians, European Christians, Africa, America, Europe was the triangle, and Christianity was the ideology of the time, was the justification for everything they did, especially slavery, and the Bible abides. So we are going to talk about subjects like this, religion and slavery and other stuff, as we did in Hebrew in many episodes. Our English listeners don't know, but we had already 27 episodes. Some of them are about religion and the consequences of religious beliefs, because it's beliefs and consequences, and beliefs, of course, is very related to religion, and religion justified for many centuries the worst things that have been done. We are talking, when we say religion, we are talking about especially Christianity based on the Bible, etc. Anyway, today we learned a lot of stuff, of course, as a matter of a title only, because we could go deeper, and we probably will in the future. So I think our listeners in Israel learned a lot, if they can understand a little English, like my broken English or your fast English. I hope it was okay. I apologize for my mistake and mispronunciation. I never studied the English language, but life taught me a little bit. Movies, book, university, articles. I did what I could. Anyway, in the future, I will have more conversations with Yolanda about things that we already spoke about, right, in previous episodes.
Yes, we will provide an English language recap.
Okay, that will be tough for me. When you have to take things from the Talmud and explain them in Hebrew, it's tough. Imagine if now I have to prepare myself to say them in English, and later we'll probably do some episodes in Spanish also, because I also have requests from family and friends in Argentina and other places.
Sí, es
Tell
muy
us.
importante.
See, they tell us this. We had the feeling that we would be interested in what you are blabbering. So maybe we would. Maybe we will also. So We don't promise when, right? Most episodes we're still going to be in Hebrew, obviously, but from time to time we're going to do something else in English.
Yes.
And later in Spanish.
Yes, don't worry. I'll do the heavy lifting for the English.
Okay. So, do you want to say any epilogue of yourself, to our Israeli listeners, be more open to questioning your own beliefs? I mean, that's our message always. Whatever we believe, don't take your beliefs as 100%, iron-made. Maybe you're missing a few things, important things about other people.
Right. I would say, since we just had the wonderful holiday of Purim, and it's something that we Black Jews try to tell our brothers and sisters often, and sadly it seems to fall on deaf ears, but I'll say I'm tired of having this conversation year after year. Okay, we're Jews. Wherever we come from, whether we're Black American Jews, Ethiopian Black Israeli Jews, from Poland, from Argentina, everywhere in between, we're Jews and we're supposed to be a community and a family and care about each other. So the whole thing of hazing, of my grandparents got mistreated when they had their aliyah, I went through this, so now you have to as well, really needs to stop. We need to stop passing down oppression and hurt to one another in the sense of, well, you're a newbie and you've got to suffer through it. And I'm saying this and wrapping it up with in the bow of Purim because every year we have to write on Facebook and tell our friends, do not go out in blackface for your Purim costume. It's not okay. I don't care that you're a Jew and a minority. You are not Black. Do not put on self-tanner or shoe polish and an afro wig and call yourself whomever. It's not okay. It's not okay to put on a headdress and feathers and moccasins and make noises and call yourself an Indian chief. Those feathers mean something to a whole lot of people. If it's a part of someone's history and culture and religion, it's not a costume.
We grew up, even in Argentina or everywhere, people disguising themselves to, cowboys and Indians. It's like the good guys and the bad guys. But the problem is cowboy could be a profession or whatever, but the Indian is supposed to be an ethnicity. Not to mention that they're not from India. It was a mistake perpetuated, were Native Americans. But yeah, some people, I remember once I told the person who wrote about her kids that they're behaving in a holiday like Indians. And I told her, I know she meant doing balagan, missing everything in the house, but explain, look, it's an old expression, don't do it anymore. The same when people say, don't be a pig, and then don't be, using animals, good animals. We have so many bad behaviors as humans. We don't need to exemplify them with other people or other animals. Just don't be a bad person with the same color you have already, without feathers and without nuts. So let's not use other ethnicities for jokes and other stuff.
Yes, and then wait until I tell you about the real history of cowboys. That's a whole other episode.
So we need a few episodes. Okay, so everybody, thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you, Daniel.
And thank you for all the episodes that you're going to still make behind the microphone to make it professionally. And for our listeners, thank you for listening to our first episode in English. It was the 28th episode of Beliefs and Consequences. This is the name of our site, Beliefs and Consequences. You can also find us in Spotify, Amazon, Google,
Apple.
Everywhere. And if you don't find us in some platform, tell us. We'll make it available too. ולכל מאזיננו בעברית, אני מקווה שהבנתם ונהנתם. נמשיך בפרק הבא של הלמונות ותוצאותיהן בעברית. נשתמע בפעם הבאה.